Harley-Davidson dealerships just dropped a bombshell on buyers, and no one saw it coming this hard. There was a time when walking into a Harley dealership felt like stepping into a dream. You weren't just buying a motorcycle, you were buying into a lifestyle, a culture, a legacy built on freedom, rebellion, and the open road. But in 2025, that dream is cracking, and for a lot of riders, it's not cracking quietly. Because what Harley-Davidson dealers just did wasn't just business as usual. It wasn't a one-off mistake or a minor misstep. It was a calculated move, years in the making, that's now exploding in their face. So what exactly happened? How did things get so bad that some riders, lifelong Harley loyalists, are now refusing to set foot in a dealership? Let's start at the beginning. Back before the pandemic, you could walk into a dealership with some savings, maybe trade in your old bike, and ride out on a brand new Harley. Was it cheap? No, but it was fair, attainable. Then everything changed. First came the supply chain shocks, then came inflation. And buried beneath the headlines was something more subtle and far more sinister. Harley dealers weren't just reacting to market changes, they were using them, weaponizing them. Suddenly, that $19,000 Street Glide was listed for $25,000. Harley-Davidson dealerships just dropped a bombshell on buyers, and no one saw it coming this hard. There was a time when walking into a Harley dealership felt like stepping into a dream. You weren't just buying a motorcycle, you were buying into a lifestyle, a culture, a legacy built on freedom, rebellion, and the open road. But in 2025, that dream is cracking, and for a lot of riders, it's not cracking quietly. Because what Harley-Davidson dealers just did wasn't just business as usual. It wasn't a one-off mistake or a minor misstep. It was a calculated move, years in the making, that's now exploding in their face. So what exactly happened? How did things get so bad that some riders, lifelong Harley loyalists, are now refusing to set foot in a dealership? Let's start at the beginning. Back before the pandemic, you could walk into a dealership with some savings, maybe trade in your old bike, and ride out on a brand new Harley. Was it cheap? No, but it was fair, attainable. Then everything changed. First came the supply chain shocks, then came inflation. And buried beneath the headlines was something more subtle and far more sinister. Harley dealers weren't just reacting to market changes, they were using them, weaponizing them. Suddenly, that $19,000 Street Glide was listed for $25,000 before fees. Suddenly, financing came with 8% interest and 7-year terms. And suddenly, the culture that used to welcome riders in with open arms was slamming the door unless you were ready to play by their rules. Here's the kicker. Sales are collapsing. In the first quarter of 2025, Harley-Davidson's global retail motorcycle sales dropped 21%. North America, their home turf, saw a 24% dive. That's not just a bad month. That's not a seasonal slump. That's a crisis. And it's not hard to see why. Dealers got greedy. They overplayed their hand. They pushed the limits of what riders were willing to tolerate, and this time, riders didn't take the bait. So now, bikes are collecting dust. Showrooms that once roared with energy are quiet, and for the first time in decades, it's not cool to ride a Harley. It's complicated. But to understand how we got here, we've got to take a closer look, not just at the prices themselves, but at how they were delivered. Because the biggest betrayal? It wasn't just the number on the tag, it was everything they didn't tell you. Price hikes, markups, and hidden fees. Let me ask you something. How much would you expect to pay for a base model Road Glide in 2025? 27? Maybe $28,000? What if I told you some buyers were quoted over $34,000 with no factory upgrades, no customization, no special edition badge, just a base model with fees? And it doesn't stop there. We're talking about market adjustments, a harmless sounding phrase that in reality means we added a few grand to the sticker price because we can. Then came the destination fees, setup fees, documentation fees, and here's the part that really hits. A lot of those changes aren't even from Harley-Davidson themselves, they're entirely up to the dealer. Some dealerships are charging around $2,000 just to prepare the bike, which usually means a quick oil check and a battery test. One buyer from Phoenix posted their invoice online showing a $600 documentation fee, a $1,200 paint protection package, and no joke, a $250 dealer celebration fee. Whatever that means. It's like being hit with a series of slow punches. You think the worst is over, and then boom, another charge, another line item, another reason to second guess your decision. So what happens when you push back? Well, that's when the pressure starts. Dealers are trained to sell these fees as standard. Everyone pays them. It's required. You can't take them off. It's policy. But behind closed doors, those fees are flexible, if you know how to fight. Most people don't, and that's the point. Because it's not about the bike anymore. It's about margins. And financing? Don't even get me started. A dealership might offer a 6-year loan at 6.9% interest. Sounds doable, right? But run the math, and you realize that a $22,000 bike is going to cost you over 38 grand by the time you're done. And don't forget the upsells they bake into the loan, extended warranties, service plans, tire and wheel protection, some of which you don't even realize you've bought until it's too late. This isn't an accident, it's a system, and for years it's worked. Dealers normalized the overpricing, buyers got conditioned. If you wanted a Harley, you paid the price, period. But here's the twist. In 2025, it stopped working. People got fed up. Word spread. Forums lit up with stories of buyers walking out. Videos exposing markups started going viral, and slowly but surely, the illusion began to crumble. So what happens next? Well, it turns out, dealers weren't just raising prices, they were playing games with inventory too. Limited inventory game. After the pricing and fees, you'd think that would be the end of the story, but the next layer, it's even more manipulative. Because when riders started questioning why bikes were so expensive, dealers had an easy answer: supply and demand. And on paper it made sense. Pandemic-era shortages, shipping backlogs, parts delay, all of it was real. And for a while, it did affect how many bikes were available. But what wasn't real? The idea that Harley dealerships still couldn't get inventory in 2025. That's when people started asking questions. I did too. Why were certain models always unavailable? Why did bikes shown as in transit never arrive? And why did a bike that was supposedly spoken for show up weeks later on the floor with a $3,000 markup? I started digging, and what I found was a pattern. In cities across the country, from Austin to Sacramento, Phoenix to Pittsburgh, dealerships were allegedly holding bikes in storage. Some riders claimed they'd seen brand new street bobs and lowriders parked behind dealerships, unlisted and untouched, while the sales team claimed they were sold or delayed. In online forums, employees from inside the industry began chiming in, and the stories were eerily consistent. Dealers were staging scarcity. You could be told a certain bike was already sold. The next week, that same bike appears in the showroom with a limited availability Act Now sticker slapped on the tank and a $2,500 high demand fee tacked onto the invoice. At first, it sounds unbelievable, but the more you look, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't isolated, it was coordinated. The game was simple. Limit what's visible, inflate the sense of urgency, and make the buyer feel like they're lucky just to be allowed to buy. Because when people think there's only one bike left, they don't negotiate, they don't compare prices, they just act fast. And that's exactly what dealers wanted. But this year, something shifted. Riders stopped panicking. They stopped believing the hype. Some started calling other dealerships to verify availability. Others began using VIN tracking to uncover where bikes actually were. What they found shattered the illusion. Showrooms weren't empty because Harley couldn't ship bikes. They were empty because the dealers wanted them to be. And suddenly, the mystique began to unravel. Customers walked into stores and saw the same bikes week after week. The urgency faded. That buzz dealers relied on, it died. Which leads us to the next tactic they used to keep margins high. One that frustrated buyers even more. If they couldn't get you on the price, they'd get you on everything around it. Buyers forced into paying for extras they didn't ask for. Let me paint you a picture. Say you finally found the Harley you want. Maybe it's a stripped down Softail or a clean all-black Sport Glide. You're ready. You've got financing lined up. You know what the MSRP is. You're thinking, this is it, the hard part's over. But then the dealer hands you the final quote, and it's thousands more than you expected. That's when the surprises begin. You start scanning the numbers. There's a protection package, a performance tune, a chrome upgrade, maybe even a prepaid maintenance plan. Some of it you recognize, most of it you never asked for. But here's the catch. Those extras are already installed. They've preloaded the bike with upgrades and buried them into the price. You can't remove them. You can't decline them. The bike's not for sale without them. And if you ask why, you get a smirk, maybe a shrug, maybe a, well, that's just how we do it here. This is the new trick in the playbook, forced bundling. Dealers pre-install accessories, crash bars, LED lights, phone mounts, saddlebag liners, and add thousands to the sticker price before you even sit down to negotiate. They tell you it's customized for your convenience, but really, it's just a way to boost profits without touching the official MSRP. I've seen invoices where buyers were charged over $1,400 for paint protection, which turned out to be a basic wax. Extended warranties that only covered a fraction of repairs. Tire protection plans with deductibles so high they were practically useless. And worse, some dealers make these extras a condition of sale. You want the bike? You're paying for the bundle. That's the level of pressure buyers are facing. It's not just upselling, it's extortion dressed in dealership uniforms. And for riders who grew up wrenching on their bikes, who know the cost of real performance parts, it's not just frustrating, it's insulting. Because this isn't how it used to be. It used to be buy the bike, ride it home, and customize it your way. Now, you're paying for someone else's idea of value, and you don't get a choice. And the impact? It's massive. These mandatory add-ons push out the door prices so high that even well-off buyers are walking away. And for younger riders who are already grappling with student loans, rent, and a shaky economy, it's a deal breaker. They're not just rejecting the add-ons, they're rejecting the whole experience. Because when you walk into a dealership ready to spend $20,000 or $30,000, you expect honesty, transparency, and respect. What you don't expect is to be strong-armed into buying a backrest and a wax job you never wanted. And the deeper this problem goes, the more riders are asking a simple question. If Harley dealers don't respect their customers, why should customers keep showing up? That's when the quiet revolt began. Used bike prices are just as bad, or worse. If the new bike market felt like a minefield, many assumed the used market would offer a way out, a chance to bypass dealer games, skip the fees, and still ride away on a solid machine. But that hope didn't last long. In 2025, the used Harley market is just as broken, and in some cases even worse. Prices have ballooned on absurd levels. 5- and 6-year-old bikes with miles on the odometer and visible wear are being listed for more than their original MSRP. A used Iron 883 with 12,000 miles is going for $11,000, a price that not long ago could get you a brand new Sportster off the lot. And this isn't some fluke. Across listings, it's the same pattern. Inflated asking prices that ride the coattails of Harley's artificially pumped up new bike pricing. Sellers know what dealerships are charging, and they're cashing in. Even private sellers are adjusting their prices to match the chaos. There are Road Kings from 2018 going for $21,000, Softail Slims from 2016 priced higher than some 2023 base models, and don't even try to find a low mileage touring bike under $15,000, because in this market, they're unicorns. The strange part? These aren't rare collector's editions or custom builds. They're standard bikes, some with nothing more than slip-ons and a luggage rack. But because new bikes have become so overpriced, these used ones have taken on an artificial premium of their own. And the worst part? Many of these used bikes are still being sold through dealers. Harley dealerships are scooping up trade-ins, slapping a few cosmetic upgrades on them, and listing them at prices that border on delusional. In some cases, used bikes are priced higher than brand new versions sitting just feet away on the same showroom floor. And when asked why, the answer is always the same: market demand. But that demand isn't real. It's desperation. It's people trying to escape the new bike trap, only to fall into a different one. Because even in the used market, many dealers are piling on fees, bundling services, and offering financing with interest rates nearly as high as for new bikes. What should have been a smart alternative ends up feeling like a parallel scam. And so the question becomes, if you can't afford new and you can't trust used, where do you go? Turns out more riders are answering that question the same way. They go anywhere else. Buyers are turning to alternatives. It didn't happen overnight. There was no boycott, no organized protest, no grand declaration that the Harley experience had gone too far. Just a slow, quiet shift. People stopped showing up. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for dealers to feel the drop in foot traffic. Enough for inventory to start sitting longer. Enough for showroom energy to fade into silence. Because riders didn't need to shout, they just needed to walk away. And that's exactly what they did. Instead of being strong-armed into inflated financing and pre-installed chrome, they started exploring the competition. For years, brands like Indian and Triumph had been growing quietly, building better reputations with each sale, offering riders solid machines without the baggage of the Harley tax. In 2025, those brands exploded. Indian's Scout lineup became the go-to answer for riders priced out of a Harley 48. The Chief series started pulling in former Street Glide owners who realized they could get just as much bike for a few thousand less, without the added insult of a market adjustment sticker. Triumph's Bonneville-based cruisers offered retro charm, low-maintenance performance, and honest pricing. No pressure, no forced bundles, just bikes, and riders responded. But the revolt didn't stop there. Japanese cruisers, long overshadowed by Harley's image-heavy branding, started making a comeback. Yamaha's Bolt, Honda's Shadow Phantom, Suzuki's Boulevard M109R, bikes that had been written off by some as cheap alternatives, were now being viewed through a different lens. Not as compromises, but as escapes. Reliable, affordable, free from dealership politics, free from pretense. Some riders even started looking toward Chinese brands like CF Moto and Lifan. Once considered knockoffs, these brands now offered modern tech, decent build quality, and unbeatable prices. In a market where $20,000 barely got you started, a $6,000 cruiser with decent power and ABS suddenly looked like a smart bet, especially for younger or first-time riders. And it didn't stop with brand shifts. The entire buying process began to change. Instead of heading to dealerships, more riders turned to private sales. Craigslist, Facebook, Marketplace, cycle forums, platforms where bikes came without finance managers and pressure tactics, just an asking price and a handshake. They weren't just buying different bikes, they were rejecting the whole system, quietly, consistently. Dealerships started to notice. Incentives returned. 0% APR financing offers reappeared. Some began waiving prep fees or bundling in free service packages. But for many, it was too late. The trust had already been broken, because once you realize there's a better way, a cheaper, simpler, more respectful way, it's hard to go back. So the revolt grew, not with noise, but with absence. And as bikes continued to sit unsold on the floor, and finance managers stared at empty offices, one truth became clearer than ever. Harley-Davidson didn't just lose those riders, they pushed them away. Independent shops are thriving. While Harley dealerships fumble the ball, there's a group quietly picking it up and running with it. Independent shops. These small, often family-run garages used to be seen as the underdogs, the go-to place for older Harleys or out-of-warranty service, but now, they're becoming the heart of the community again. Why? Because they don't nickel and dime you. They don't push overpriced parts that you didn't ask for, and they sure as hell don't treat every customer like a sales target. And riders are noticing. Take a look at the numbers. Service appointments are backlogged at some independent shops for weeks. Riders are ditching dealer service plans in favor of local wrenchers who actually take the time to explain what your bike needs, and who don't charge you $200 just to plug in a diagnostic tool. These shops are also doing something dealers forgot how to do: build relationships. Walk into one and you'll see it. The mechanic knows the rider's name. They talk about the last rally. They might even share a coffee while waiting for a part to arrive. It's not transactional, it's personal. Even better, these shops are becoming mini community hubs. Some are hosting ride nights. Others are starting YouTube channels showing DIY tips and upgrade walkthroughs. One popular shop in Texas started offering bike buying consultations to help new riders avoid dealership traps, and it's booked weeks in advance. They're not just servicing bikes, they're earning loyalty, the kind Harley dealerships used to be known for. And in a poetic twist, a lot of these independent shops are started by former Harley techs or managers who got tired of the games and decided to do things their way. They know the bikes inside out, and they know what riders want: honesty, quality, and respect. That's the trifecta. So while Harley dealerships sit on bloated inventory and scramble to patch their reputations, these smaller shops are thriving. Not because they're cheaper, but because they're real. They're what the Harley experience was supposed to feel like. And if the motor company doesn't act fast, these independents might not just steal customers, they might redefine what it means to be part of the Harley community. The financing trap no one talks about. Let me tell you where a lot of Harley buyers are getting burned, and most don't even realize it until it's too late. I'm talking about the financing office, because let's be honest, most folks aren't dropping 25 grand in cash on a street glide, they're financing. And in 2025, that's where things are getting real shady. Now, yeah, we all know interest rates have gone up, that's nothing new. But what isn't getting talked about enough is how some dealers are quietly jacking up rates and burying fees, using financing as their personal piggy bank. I've seen it. I've talked to guys who walked in thinking they were getting a solid deal, and walked out with a loan that'll bleed them dry for the next 7 years. Here's how it works. You apply for financing at the dealership. Let's say the bank approves you for 7.5%. Not bad, right? But then the dealer tells you it's 10.5%. What happened? They marked it up. And that extra 3%? Straight into their pockets. Legally, they can't do that. And they don't have to tell you a damn thing. Unless you walk in with a pre-approval from your bank or credit union, you're flying blind. And it doesn't stop there. Once you get in that back office, it's like a trap door opens. They start stacking on extended warranties, tire protection, key fob replacement, gap insurance, paint protection. And before you know it, you're nodding along to a payment plan that sounds reasonable, but when you do the math, you're financing a $20,000 bike for $31,000 over 7 years. Guys are paying $600 or $700 a month for a motorcycle, and most of them didn't even realize what they agreed to until the first bill came in. Why? Because it was buried deep in a dealer package or lumped into vague terms like required coverage. You get caught up in the moment, the chrome, the rumble, the dream, and they know that. They're selling emotion, not just a bike. And trust me, it's not just happening at car dealerships. I've heard from multiple Harley buyers who felt like the whole experience was more about pushing paperwork than building trust. You walk in for the bike of your dreams, and you walk out with a debt anchor. People are waking up though. Forums are lighting up with buyers calling this out. TikTokers are breaking down their loan terms and saying, "Don't be like me." The conversation's shifting, and that's a problem for dealers who have built their bottom line on financing games. Because once a rider feels tricked, that's it. They don't come back, and they sure as hell don't recommend you to their buddies. Inside the Harley-Davidson dealer strategy. When you see what's happening on the showroom floor, the inflated prices, the pressure tactics, the markups dressed as policy, it's easy to point fingers at the dealers themselves. But dig deeper and the picture gets more complicated, because while the dealers are the ones face to face with the customer, the engine behind this entire crisis is running from much higher up. And to really understand how things got this bad, you have to look at Harley-Davidson's corporate playbook and the man writing the strategy, Jochen Zeitz. Since becoming CEO, he's made one thing crystal clear: Harley isn't chasing volume anymore, it's chasing margins. This shift began quietly back in the early 2020s with what the company called its hardwire strategy. The message was simple but bold. Harley was going to refocus on core strengths, shrink product lines, limit availability, and go after premium customers. Not riders, premium customers. The goal? Fewer bikes sold at higher prices, with fatter profit margins per unit. Now, on a spreadsheet, it makes sense. For a company struggling with declining ridership and aging demographics, boosting profit without needing to sell more units looked like a way to stabilize the business. But here's the thing. When your customer base is built on working class riders, veterans, mechanics, and road warriors, a premium rebrand feels like a betrayal. Suddenly, the bikes weren't designed for the everyday rider. They were built for image-conscious buyers with bigger wallets and less loyalty. And the dealerships? They were caught in the middle. Harley began consolidating its dealer network, closing underperforming stores, streamlining inventory, and shifting control to fewer, more centralized locations. That meant less competition between dealers and more power to dictate pricing. It also meant more pressure from the top. With fewer models coming in and less foot traffic walking through the doors, every bike had to deliver bigger margins. So dealers responded the only way they could, by raising prices, adding fees, and stuffing every sale with mandatory upgrades. What started as a corporate pivot toward exclusivity turned into a survival tactic for dealers. Suddenly, it wasn't enough to sell a Road Glide. You had to make the Road Glide bring in $5,000 in pure profit, whether the customer liked it or not. Finance managers were told to upsell harder. Sales staff were pushed to steer buyers toward higher margin trims and accessories. In some regions, sales bonuses were directly tied to how many extended warranties or service plans were sold per bike, not whether the customer even wanted them. And if a buyer balked, that was fine, because the new mentality was, if they walk, someone else will buy it. Harley had built a false sense of scarcity around its brand. The fear of missing out was part of the pitch, and for a while it worked. The average buyer didn't realize they were being pushed. They thought they were lucky to even be offered the bike. But over time, that illusion wore thin, especially when riders started comparing notes. When someone in Texas realized they were quoted $4,000 more than someone in Iowa for the same bike. When riders discovered that the mandatory fees were anything but. When people realized that other brands weren't doing this. It became clear. This wasn't the cost of inflation. This was the cost of strategy. A strategy that treated loyalty like a given, that saw tradition as leverage, that assumed Harley's name was strong enough to survive any amount of corporate greed. But tradition only gets you so far, and by 2025, riders weren't buying the story anymore. They were paying attention, and more importantly, they were keeping their wallets shut. So now, with the strategy in full swing and the revolt underway, the spotlight shifts back to Harley-Davidson itself. The dealers are scrambling, the riders are angry, but what about the motor company? Are they listening? Or are they still convinced this is the way forward? Dealers are feeling the heat. For a while, it looked like the dealerships were untouchable. They were stacking fees, marking up bikes, locking in financing, and still moving units. But that wave? It's crashing hard now, and the cracks are showing. Look around, the inventory is piling up. New Harleys that used to fly out the door in spring now sit idle through summer. Floor plans are full. Bikes are collecting dust, and some dealers are quietly slashing prices just to keep things moving. One insider on Reddit, who claims to work at a major dealership in the Midwest, said their shop has had multiple months in a row with fewer than 5 new bike sales. That used to be a good weekend. And it's not just sales. Service departments that once ran like assembly lines are now trying to drum up business with free inspections and oil change specials. The buzz is gone. The energy's missing. And the staff? A lot of them are starting to feel the pressure from above. Because here's the thing, dealerships don't actually own most of the bikes you see on the showroom floor. They're financed through what's called a floor plan loan, and those loans come with interest. The longer these bikes sit unsold, the more it costs the dealer. And with higher interest rates across the board in 2025, that squeeze is brutal. Now mix in an increasingly vocal customer base calling out shady fees online. Mix in YouTubers and TikTokers pulling receipts, showing $5,000 in mandatory add-ons and calling it what it is, theft in a leather vest. The dealership model isn't just under pressure, it's getting exposed. Some dealers are trying to pivot, offering price match guarantees, doing away with forced warranties, even backing off from those appearance packages nobody wants. But here's the issue, the damage is done. People remember being burned. They remember getting laughed out of the showroom for asking to pay MSRP. That kind of reputation doesn't go away overnight. Others though, they're doubling down, acting like it's still 2021, and everyone's just gotta line up to overpay. Those are the ones that are going to sink. One major dealership group in the South already laid off over a dozen employees and consolidated 2 locations into one. Quietly, no press release, just gone. And this downturn, it's hitting small towns the hardest. In places where there's only one dealership within 100 miles, people are fed up. They're driving to neighboring states, buying used, or walking away from Harley altogether. Some are switching to Indian, some are going Japanese. Others are just keeping their current ride and skipping the upgrade. The truth is, dealerships are at a crossroads. They can either listen to the community and evolve, or keep chasing profits until there's nobody left to sell to. And that brings us to the million-dollar question. What Harley needs to do before it's too late? Harley-Davidson isn't just selling motorcycles, it's selling culture, a lifestyle, a legacy, and right now, that legacy is being dragged through the mud by the very people who are supposed to carry the torch. So what now? The first thing Harley needs to do, immediately, is rein in the dealerships. They need to stop pretending that they're all independently owned means they can look the other way, because when a dealership slaps $8,000 in garbage fees on a lowrider ST and it goes viral on Instagram, nobody blames the dealership, they blame Harley. It's brand damage, and it's bleeding. They've done it before. Remember when Ford and GM had to crack down on dealers inflating prices on the Bronco and the Corvette? Harley needs to follow that same model, create guidelines, enforce them, and punish bad actors. That might mean stripping allocations from repeat offenders. It might mean auditing pricing practices. Whatever it is, it has to happen, yesterday. Second, Harley needs to start supporting independent shops and community mechanics. These are the folks keeping the culture alive at the grassroots level. Why not create a certified Harley community garage program, offering discounted tools, parts, and training in exchange for quality standards? It's a win-win. Harley builds trust, shops get support, and riders feel valued. Third, Harley needs to rethink its pricing. They spent years chasing the high-dollar premium market, forgetting that the core of their brand was never about being elite. It was about being American, rugged, rebellious, and for the average rider. Where's the $11,000 bare-bones cruiser with classic looks and nothing extra? Where's the stripped-down old-school Sportster that doesn't come with Bluetooth speakers or a 60-page manual? They need to bring back accessibility, not just to win back older riders, but to pull in new ones who are watching from the sidelines thinking, cool bike, but I'll never afford that. Fourth, and this is big, Harley needs to take over the buying experience. Tesla proved it can work, so did Carvana. Harley should offer direct-to-consumer sales online, letting riders build their bike, see real prices, and even get it delivered to their nearest certified mechanic or showroom. Cut the middleman, let the buyer breathe.